Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives like this one. Today we're tackling something, well, it's got everyone kind of on edge. It's election integrity.
Oh, yeah.
We are just one day away from a major election, and it seems like anxieties are running pretty high.
Right. And with good reason, I think, a peaceful transfer of power. It's kind of the bedrock of a healthy democracy.
Well,
And the fact that it's even a question mark right now is definitely a cause for concern.
totally. It's like those pre-game jitters,
Yeah.
but like on a national scale.
Yeah.
So to help us all make sense of this whole thing, we're going to dive into some recent reporting. And first up, we've got these excerpts from a CNN interview.
Oh.
Senator Tim Scott went head-to-head with Dana Bash, and it got a little spicy.
Oh, I bet Dana Bash, she's a seasoned journalist. She does not shy away from the tough questions.
Oh, no, she does not. And she goes straight for it. She asks Senator Scott point blank, will Trump accept the election results if he loses? And that's where things get interesting. Instead of a simple yes or no, we get a lot of words, but not a clear answer.
Yeah, that's classic political discourse, strategic ambiguity, they call it. It's a way of appearing to address the question without actually committing to a stance. And it can be pretty effective at deflecting pressure while, not alienating potential voters.
Right, playing it safe. But Bash, she doesn't let him off the hook that easily. She brings up Trump's claims of widespread fraud, specifically in Pennsylvania. And she points out that local officials have debunked those claims.
Right, and that's where this gets really significant. Bash is calling out the potential for misinformation to actually undermine the entire electorate process.
And this is where that word misinformation gets real. We're not just talking about rumors. We're talking about potentially fabricated information. That's meant to cause distrust and chaos.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important for everyone to have a shared understanding of what's credible versus what's deliberately misleading. Otherwise, we're just, swimming in a sea of uncertainty, vulnerable to manipulation.
So we've got Senator Scott dodging the question of accepting the election results. We've got Bash pushing back against misinformation. And then things get really real when Bash brings up January 6th.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room. A stark reminder of what can happen when faith in democratic institutions erodes and rhetoric turns into real-world consequences.
Exactly. And it's even more significant because Senator Scott was actually at the Capitol that day. So when Bash asks him about Trump's rhetoric and his potential to incite violence, it's heavy.
It's like she's drawing a direct line between the events of January 6th and the anxieties surrounding this upcoming election.
Right. It's a lot. But instead of addressing those concerns, about potential violence or the echoes of January 6th, Senator Scott pivots and he blames, wait for it, the liberal media.
Ah, a classic deflection tactic. Shifting the blame away from the individual or the party onto an outside entity. It happens all the time in these politically charged situations.
It's like don't look at me, look over there.
Yeah.
But Dana Bash is not having it. She points out that it was Trump himself making those claims about fraud, not the media.
Which highlights another crucial point, the importance of critical thinking and media literacy. We need to be able to discern between factual reporting and opinion pieces. Identify biases and agendas.
So it's like we have to become our own fact checkers.
Absolutely. In this information landscape, we have to be discerning consumers of information. You have to evaluate sources critically. And don't fall prey to these misinformation campaigns.
So much to think about. We've got Senator Scott dodging tough questions, Bash pushing back against misinformation, bringing up January 6th, and then we get the blame game. It's like a political thriller in real time. But wait, there's more. This deep dive takes an unexpected turn with our second source, and it adds a whole new layer of intrigue to this electoral drama. Stay tuned for part 2, where we delve into the fascinating world of betting odds.
This is where things get really interesting. Welcome back. It's fascinating, isn't it? How these seemingly random pieces of information, like a contentious interview or shifting betting odds, they start to paint a bigger picture, of the anxieties around this election.
Yeah, it's like piecing together a puzzle.
Exactly. And one piece that really stands out to me is when Dana Bash brings up January 6th. It's not just a reference to the past, It's a direct link to what could happen if we lose faith in our elections. It adds this weight to the conversation, this sense of urgency. It's a reminder that what we say has real-world consequences, especially when people lose trust in the system. And that's when things get dangerous, when the foundation of democracy starts to crumble.
Right, it's like a scary reminder of what can happen when things get too heated, too divided. And the fact that Senator Scott was there at the Capitol that day, It makes his dodging the question about Trump's rhetoric even more significant. Like, he saw it firsthand. He experienced the chaos and the danger. And now we're seeing this potential echo with these claims of fraud and not wanting to commit to accepting the results. It's a pattern.
It is. It really underscored how fragile these democratic systems are. They depend on trust, on a willingness to play by the rules, even when you don't like the outcome.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate for a sec. Couldn't you argue that Scott's just trying to stay neutral, not alienate voters on either side? I mean, politicians are always trying to walk that line right, balance their own beliefs with the demands of their party and their voters.
It's possible, but there's a fine line between neutrality and complicity. At what point does staying silent become an endorsement of something harmful? Especially in moments like this, when the very idea of democracy is being questioned. It's crucial to think about where that line is.
So we've got this potential threat to democratic norms, fueled by misinformation, and amplified by figures like Steve Bannon, who literally told Trump to declare victory no matter what. That's chilling.
It is. But I think it's important to remember that the future isn't set in stone. Our choices matter. Our actions matter. They all shape the outcome. We can choose to be informed, to engage in these discussions, to demand better from our leaders.
That all sounds good in theory, but does it really make a difference? It's easy to feel powerless as just one person.
I believe it does, because ultimately the strength of a democracy lies in the participation of its citizens. It's about holding those in power accountable, challenging misinformation, and advocating for a system that reflects our values. It's a call to action. It's a reminder that the future of democracy isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create.
Okay, I like that. It's empowering. Like, we're not just watching this all unfold. We have a role to play.
Exactly. And that brings us to another fascinating point, the betting odds. So Senator Scott seemed pretty confident about a Trump victory, but the betting markets, they aren't so sure. Our second source talks about how the odds are actually shifting against Trump after this recent poll.
The betting odds. So you're saying the people who are putting their money where their mouth is, they aren't so convinced about a Trump win. For those of us who don't spend our days looking at betting odds, what does this even mean?
Well, betting markets are interesting. They often reflect information and sentiment that goes beyond traditional polling. It's about what people are actually putting their money on, which can be a better predictor of outcomes than just opinions. They take into account all sorts of things: polling data, news events, even social media sentiment.
So it's like a giant real-time gauge of public opinion, but with actual money on the line.
You could say that. And what's interesting here is that the betting markets are showing us something that the polls might be missing.
So are you saying they're more accurate?
Not necessarily more accurate, but they offer a different perspective, a different way of measuring the collective wisdom.
Okay, that makes sense. So if the betting markets are shifting away from Trump, does that mean people are losing faith in him winning?
It's one interpretation. It could also reflect a growing belief that the race is tightening, that the outcome is less certain. Maybe they're picking up on something the polls aren't.
More uncertainty, more volatility. So is this going to be a nail-biter?
All signs point to yes. And that's why I think this deep dive has been so important. It's helped us unpack all the complexities, examine the anxieties, and really grapple with the consequences of a system that's under pressure. We've gone from dodging questions to invoking January 6th, to analyzing betting odds. It's like a crash course in election year anxieties. But knowledge is power, right? The more we understand what's going on, the better equipped we are to handle the challenges ahead. It's so true. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, we've got one more piece of the puzzle to look at: the role of the media in all of this. All right, we are back for the final part of our election integrity deep dive. We've talked about dodging questions, the shadow of January 6th, even those betting odds. But there's one more piece to this whole thing. We got to talk about the media.
Yeah, it's impossible to ignore their role in all this.
Especially with all the talk about misinformation and bias.
Right. And remember how Senator Scott blamed the liberal media for spreading misinformation? It got me thinking, what is their responsibility here? I mean, they're kind of like the messengers, right? But what happens when people don't trust the messengers anymore?
That's the big question, isn't it? We're in this time where trust in traditional media is fractured. And information or misinformation, it spreads so quickly online, it creates the perfect environment for the kind of blame shifting we saw from Senator Scott. It's easier to point the finger at the media than to actually deal with the complicated issues.
Right. It's like a free pass for politicians who don't want to answer the tough questions.
True.
But let's be real. The media does have a huge impact on how we see the world. They set the narrative, highlight certain events, shape the conversation.
Absolutely. And with that power comes a lot of responsibility. They have to report accurately, present different perspectives, and hold those in power accountable, even when it's uncomfortable.
But how can they do that when everyone's accusing them of bias,
Yeah,
of pushing their own agenda? It feels like we're stuck in this cycle of distrust.
it's a tough situation, no doubt. But I think transparency is key. Being upfront about any potential biases, clearly separating news from opinion, and basically showing their work. Let the audience see how they got to their conclusions.
So it's about rebuilding that trust by being as open and honest as possible, kind of like showing your receipts
Right.
to prove you're not making things up.
Exactly. And it's not just on the media to fix this. We have a responsibility, too, as consumers of information. We have to think critically, evaluate our sources, and be wary of anything that feels too sensational or one-sided.
So it's a two-way street. The media needs to step up, and we need to be more discerning about what we consume. That sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but the stakes are high. If we want a functioning democracy, we need a media we can trust, and we need to be informed citizens who can critically evaluate all the information coming at us.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. Election integrity, potential violence, the power of misinformation, and the role of the media. It's been intense, but also really insightful.
I agree. And as we head into this election, remember, knowledge is power. Stay informed, stay engaged. And most importantly, think critically about the information you encounter. Don't just take things at face value. Question everything. Dig deeper. Form your own conclusions.
Well said. And on that note, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on all of this? What questions do you have as we approach this election? Leave your comments below. Let's keep this conversation going.
And remember, no matter what happens, our democracy depends on us participating. So stay informed, stay engaged, and never underestimate the power of your voice.
Kind of said it better myself. And before we go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.